Hi everyone, my name is Thilo, Program Manager at Murzilli Consulting, and we're today at the Commercial UAV Expo 2024 in Las Vegas. With me I have Scott Lashmit from Cyberhawk, Aviation Manager. Glad to have you on stage.
Thank you so much. Very pleased to be here.
Thank you for taking the time to answer a few questions and get to know you and Cyberhawk. So for the community and the people who might not heard of Cyberhawk or just have a very basic understanding of what the company is doing, could you introduce us into Cyberhawk? What are you doing?
Absolutely. So Cyberhawk has been around since 2008. It was originally founded by people who used to climb offshore oil rigs. And in 2008, they kind of looked around and said, there has to be a better, safer way to do this. And truly that underpins everything we do, which is getting people out of harm's way in these operations. So they quickly looked into drones. And since then, we have scaled and grown. We operate in over 40 countries throughout the world. I am the aviation manager for the US, so we do a lot of transmission and distribution inspections, wildfire maintenance programs to prevent wildfires from aging or damaged electrical assets. And we work with large companies, small companies, solar, renewable energies, gas and electric, onshore and offshore. And we've really grown, and we continue to grow this year. We just released some press release where I think it was something like 50% year-over-year revenue growth, which is absolutely fantastic. And we are
definitely.
Yeah, we are aiming to continue that growth for the next 5 years. And that's kind of how we ended up where we are today.
Amazing. That's pretty good to hear. And I think you've been, or the company itself is really long in that industry, like starting early and in scaling with industry, evolving in a market where regulations were not in place, evolved over time and keep on changing. And you managed to scale into multiple countries worldwide. What does this mean for an organization, and how have you become so successful to evolve with emerging rule sets, with emerging technologies?
I think it's an incredible question and truly a wonderful balance that Cyberhawk has reached, because we're always pushing the edge and trying to innovate while also maintaining safe operations within whatever regulatory framework we have to work in. And with 40 countries, that's 40 different CAAs, or in the US, FAAs that we have to deal with. And so we're lucky to have truly wonderful people on the regulation side, but also on the operation sides. And, we've been scaling for years, and we've kind of hit an inflection point where we're truly scaling even more. We're about to go hire another 16 to 30 pilots for the January 2025 season. And that's only in the US. And I think it's not just perseverance. There are always ups and downs, but truly the safety mindset and what we refer to as the Cyberhawk way of flying, which sometimes we are slightly more expensive than some of our competitors, and we have had clients leave us for that. And almost all of them have within a year or two come back because there is a right way to do things. And we are very safety minded and aviation minded. We bring a lot of Part 61 in the US, or manned operations, to what we do. And, from risk analysis prior to even planning an operation, or method statements for how we'll conduct and how we'll mitigate any safety risks, we really put a focus on operating correctly and flying one time and getting the data that we need. That's really our biggest thing. A lot of companies will come through and try to push just production, and there's many issues with that. There's burnout with pilots, there's burnout with planners, there's burnout with management. But also, to really push those numbers, you're putting the numbers before you are safe operations. And it's always been our mentality to focus on safe operations. I personally, I'm an aviation manager. Safety is near and dear to my heart. A lot of times people think of safety as a handbrake on operations, and I truly don't view it that way. I look at it as enabling safe operations, and I don't think the two are diametrically opposed. I think if you do it correctly, you can hit production numbers that allow you to generate the revenue that we have and keep and grow the clientele that we have. And, it's one of those, as a drone service provider, you're always one mistake away from being kicked off a project. And I try to emphasize that with our pilots, that I would rather, we call it stand down. Every pilot has the final approval for operations. And if they have that little voice in the back of their head that says, maybe I shouldn't do this, I encourage and I stand by them to say, stand down, don't do it. We'll either figure out a way to plan it. There's a reason your little voice in your head is saying, maybe I shouldn't fly that close to a tree, or maybe I shouldn't fly over this property.
And I think that that's an excellent point. And I think from my point of view, speaking to various stakeholders in this industry, this is one of the core challenges that you have in building a safe business, but also a commercial viable and profitable business. Like, you have always customers and clients pushing you, asking for a cheaper price or more risky operations, being faster in the air, doing more operations, like expanding the limits of what you can do. While you as a company always have to make sure to maintain safety and stay in that business. Otherwise, one mistake can kill you, kill the company, can kill the public acceptance of what we are doing. And in a growing and developing industry, this is really a difficult field to operate in. And what did Cyberhawk do so successfully to grow to such size while maintaining safety? Because from my point of view, that is really, really a challenge.
Absolutely. So one of the major changes that we've made over the past few years, we've shifted from temporary and seasonal pilots to full-time pilots. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to spend more time and energy and money into training them and getting them to fly, again, that Cyberhawk way, where it's not about hitting 300 towers in a day. It's about hitting the numbers we need to hit to generate revenue, which, we are a business. So at some point in time, there is a minimum number that we have to hit. But we try to make sure that when we're pricing out, that number is not strenuous on the pilot. We look at things like whether a single-person operation or dual-person operation makes sense. For a lot of our transmission inspections, they're all dual-person operations. We have a pilot and a sensor operator. And from a checklist and safety standpoint, that means they're sounding off and they're double-checking to make sure those arms are tightened. They're double-checking to make sure the SD card is formatted. All of these little things. For a lot of the distribution assets we do, fiscally, it makes more sense to do single-person operations. And one of the things that our safety and SMS teams have done is to really step back and say, okay, what are the additional risks for SPO operations, as we call them? And one of them is not having that other person. And so I encourage all of my pilots, and it sounds a little crazy, but I encourage them to speak aloud, to say the checklist out loud, because psychologically, it is a different voice than just in your head. And if you're going through the checklist, which I love, I am you got an aviation guy, checklists all day long, because complacency is probably our biggest problem. Is once you start getting to a point in which you've done it so often, you have thousands of hours of flights, it's easy to think you know it forwards, backwards, inside out. And that's when the silly mistakes start happening. And those silly mistakes can very quickly, if you forget to tighten on an M300, that arm, that drone is going to come down in the air. And, that is a bad day for the pilot, but also beyond that, we are proponents of the industry, and we always try to act in good faith for the industry at large. And so we try to operate in such a way that we're not putting, a black mark on UAS operations as a whole. And it's one of those, safety things that, drones put people to a level 10 automatically. And so we try to mitigate a lot of these. We do outreach before we fly. We have our pilots knock on the door. Some of the assets that we fly are on someone's property, sometimes within a few feet of their house. And so we've had to figure out ways to mitigate the risk for the pilots, but also we're very cognizant about the privacy concerns, and those are legitimate. We can show you the photos. We're not taking pictures of your house, but I can also understand if you don't know the drone's going to be there and you just see a drone flying above your house, that you immediately have a concern.
Yeah.
And so we try to do everything we can preventatively. And then in case an incident does happen, we train our pilots in conflict resolution, how to de-escalate a situation before it comes up, what to do in a situation. Unfortunately, in the United States, we do have gun incidents, threat to harm, and we try to give them both pre-support and support afterwards to ensure, because, I've had it happen to me, and that is a very stressful time, and it takes you a while to come back down. So we always try to investigate the cause, and it's not about blame. It's not about assigning, hey, the pilot should have done this. It's more about learning so that we can continue. And also we can spread that message for best practices to the rest of the industry. How do you do operations in these critical assets that could be on, someone's property or close to their house, and do it in such a way where hopefully we can prevent anything from happening. But if something does happen, we can also kind of de-escalate quickly and let them know, hey, we're flying for this company. Here's what we're doing. We'll show you the photos, just so to reaffirm we're not there doing anything maleficent. We're there. The other option is the power company comes and has to shut the power off for your pole. We can do it in 5 minutes, or they send a helicopter.
Okay, that's interesting. So to summarize what I understood, like first of course, you need to have reliable technology that you can operate with, and that you rely on manufacturers that they meet standards and that
100%.
you get what you need for safe and reliable operations. Then training pilots and running the right internal procedures, safety measures, emphasizing on following checklists, ensuring that your personnel is trained according to operate professionally, and then community outreach and creating awareness for what you're doing, explaining to people and de-escalate situations that might occur. Like these are like the three success factors.
Absolutely wonderful summation there. I think those would be the three pillars really of truly safe drone operations at scale, which is, we are in a unique position. We do thousands of flights every month, tens of thousands across the world, and we have an incident rate that's incredibly low per every 1,000 hours of flight. And I think truly you brought up the three pillars there of if you can do those three things, you can grow, you can scale. And if you have them in policy and procedure, you can really get to large scales and truly succeed as a drone service provider.
Very good. And that brings me to another question. Like now you have the three pillars under control, and now scaling comes in on top.
Yeah.
Operating in 40 different countries comes with a growing organization, comes with more stakeholders, comes with different rule sets to be interacting and engaging with. What are like core challenges that you see that you face from scaling, and how do you overcome them, or what makes you successful in this scaling period right now?
I think so. We have 5 core tenets at the company. I'll only bring up one, but it's one team. And it is truly the mentality that while I'm an aviation manager and Anna DeLay is our director of operations, we work closely together and there's communication. And that's really the major key is communication forwards and backwards from all directions to be able to say, is this an operation that we can do? How do we execute it safely? How do we execute it with a profit margin that keeps the business going? Because at the end of the day, we are still a business. I think the largest problems you run into with scale, especially coming from, maybe a few employees, we have 172, I believe now. So we're across the world. And we have, counterparts. I have counterparts, Neil Fry in the UK, who deals with the CAA there. And I think a lot of it is just that open and clear communication to be able to say, okay, hey, I'm working on this project. We have this other opportunity coming up in, say, Colombia. Does anybody have any expertise there? If not, how do we set this up so that we can learn the rules and regulations? We have our standard processes, which I think is probably the single biggest key. If you're looking to scale, really what you want to do is take the time to write down what it is you do, turn them into procedures and processes, because that's truly the only way to reach scale. If your institutional knowledge is still stuck in everyone's head, if somebody's sick, if somebody's on vacation, you lose that institutional knowledge and there's no way to replace it until the person is back. And I think that is probably the single thing that we do best, which is we look at what it is we do and we figure, okay, how do we scale this? And not just scaling 1-to-1 because that's untenable, but how do we get to a 5x or a 10x scaling? And so whether that's, we're in the middle of relooking about our entire planning system right now, because while it works, it's strenuous. It's almost like being an air traffic controller. You're working deconflicting with crewed helicopter operations. We do that every day with our assets and our clients. You have to worry about prisons, schools, a lot of ancillary things that, smaller drone service providers may not even consider the fact that this prison within 3 miles of us requires 72-hour notification so that they don't have to send a corrections officer out to investigate. And sometimes even when we work with them, they do. Or, we've worked on Fort Hunter Liggett, which is the Army's largest training base, and being able to collaborate with the Army and DoD, knowing that we need a DIU blue list. We need to get a PPR form to permissions. We need to get permissions to fly in their restricted airspace, and really to people manage, because at the end of the day, we're there for our client, but at the grace of the U.S. Army. And just being able to kind of collaborate. And I think it all comes back to that clear, concise communication. We write up a ConOps, a concept of operations. We show them where we're going to fly, every single pin. We look at the airspace. We tell them, here are our areas of concern. We ask them, especially on DoD projects, we tend to get our data cleared before we leave, just in case we incidentally capture something that is secure and they don't want out. But yeah, I think that's really kind of the keys there to scaling, which is setting up your processes. And even if you're a one-person company, take the time, write them down. That'll help you scale. When you've got more pilots now, we have, at our largest in the US, we had 50 pilots. We have 25 full-time pilots right now, and we're hiring another 15 to 30 pilots. And one of the other things there, we write down our processes, the same with training. We come in and I don't care if a pilot has 0 hours or 1,000 hours. I treat them exactly the same. I treat them as if they've never flown for Cyberhawk before. And sometimes they've come from other companies that have worked for the same exact client. And that's great, and it's wonderful to have that knowledge. But we still come in and we say, okay, here's how we operate. This is why our safety record is so good. This is why we've never had an FAA or NTSB reportable incident. And looking for wood to knock on. That is a faux pas in the safety industry to say out loud, but it is. We have a wonderful track record, and I'd like to keep that. And the way we do that is to invest and train these pilots up and teach them the methodologies, the reasons why we don't cut corners. Simple things like making your motions two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional avoids a lot of incidents. We can fly up and over. We have up to 400 feet. We should never really be crashing into lines or trees or things like that unless it's an emergency situation.
Okay, great. So processes are key for scaling business. That's good to hear. And maybe just one question about profitability. This is the thing. Also to keep a business running, you need to make a profit or at least has good revenue to reinvest. Is Cyberhawk currently profitable?
We are. We're a little bit of a unicorn in the industry. While we do have some underlying funding, we don't rely on VC funding. We are profitable. I believe revenue last year was just over 30 million worldwide. Yeah, and it's one of those where we are profitable, so we are standing on our own laurels for these operations. I think industry-wide there is a trend right now. Pilot pay is increasing, as well it should. What you can charge per an asset is decreasing, as well it should. We would like to say the same price, but the industry's also shifted from day rates to per an asset pricing. And day rates, there's a lot more cushion in there where it's not so bad if you can only get 8 assets in a day. Whereas the per an asset pricing, now we have a minimum number we need to reach. And we try to ensure that we price it considering our gross margin, but also the practicality of being able to collect enough in a day to pay for the operations and make a decent enough profit that we continue and we can keep growing at the way that we are.
Amazing. That sounds overall very, very good and glad to hear those unique situation that you are in as a company, because I think overall the industry still has challenges to face and to grow into a profitable and long-term market presence. Do you have, maybe as a last question, any challenges at Cyberhawk currently, or where you see the industry needs to further evolve, or the framework, the environment needs to develop further to really enable the next step for the business overall and for the environment? Is there something?
Absolutely. I think, and it's probably because it's near and dear to my heart and I deal with the FAA and rules and regulations, but I truly believe beyond visual line of sight and automation are the two keys for the market to grow for the next decade and beyond. Beyond visual line of sight allows us to collect more assets in a day. It doesn't actually affect the time it takes to do an inspection really at all. What it does is it prevents all of the ancillary things, setup, breakdown, and moving. We have sometimes we operate in California on mountains, and sometimes a pilot will have to drive an hour and a half to get to an asset that's a mile away. And so being able to minimizing all of the time that we're not flying is truly a way for us to increase efficiency. And we're always looking for automation solutions as well. Transmission inspections, distribution inspections, substations, oil and gas. We're working with several companies and several partners, trying to figure out how do we balance. The pilot will always be there. The pilot's there for the emergency situation. But how can we, either through automation or training, kind of standardize the results? There's always a normal distribution. Some of our pilots really have everything down and they can crank through numbers. They do it by walking. I stress this to the pilots. If you set yourself up in the right way, instead of flying from one end of the line to the next, if you set yourself up in the middle where you can still maintain sight of the drone, well, now you can catch maybe 10, 15 poles only having to move once, as opposed to, 3 poles moving, 3 poles moving. And it really is, I think, beyond visual line of sight, Part 108, which is coming out soon, which will shift us kind of from a waiver modality.
Looking forward.
We are all chomping at the bit, just waiting. I speak with the FAA on a weekly basis, and I'm just like, hey, when's that coming out? When can I kind of dive into this? And it'll be. I know it gets a lot of bad credit because it seems like a slow process, but that's because they're going about it the right way. They'll put out the notice for proposed rulemaking, and they'll lead it to public comment, just like 107, and there will be a lot of public comment, as with 107, and I think that's great because there's a lot of different viewpoints in the industry, and I think we need that feedback. The FAA knows rules and regulations, but really, they're not a drone service provider. They're not an AAM service. So they need some of that institutional knowledge to come back and say, hey, you wrote it this way, but what if we looked at it from a different point of view for scalability? Things like one-to-one operations. We've got companies like Zipline and Wing who have really been at the forefront of multi-drone operations per one operator. And I think for drone delivery and AAM, that is absolutely the way to go. For drone inspections, it's still probably going to be one-to-one, but I could see things like drone in a box shifting to drone in a truck. And now you can have an operator, a 107 person flying from Texas. Operator can just be driving the truck, doing their inspections on the ground, and the drone does the aerial inspections itself, either automated or truly remotely. I think there are a lot of exciting things coming in the next couple of years, and we are all waiting for 108 to come out.
Absolutely. Perfect. Glad for the insights. Thank you for sharing all of it.
Thank you for having me, Thilo. It's been wonderful.
All the information. That's really glad to have, and good to see businesses that are already well established. We learned about the pillars that make you successful, where safety is key. We heard that you are profitable already, and what are the scaling factors for the industry with BVLOS operations and more automation to be made realistic for the operation. So glad to see that outlook, and thank you for being in the show with us.
My pleasure.
As always, leave a like, follow us. We will have everything on Cyberhawk and you, Scott, in the description of the video. Your LinkedIn included, so reach out, comment if you have extra questions, and see you in the next video.
Absolutely. Thank you.